one thing that I've been learning as of late is before I go do something where maybe I don't have as good enough context, or maybe I need to go figure out what I need to learn, I'll actually just go reach out to someone in that company, in that country or whatever, and get quick feedback. And so what I've learned from an insight that I actually learned from my mentor is like, he calls it think, feel, do. So like think, be like, okay, what do I need to think about before I go into this presentation? Feel, how does the audience feel and how do I make them feel comfortable? And then do, like how do I execute off what I'm feeling off of them?
Welcome to Coach the Sale, the podcast for sales professionals on the path to becoming sales leaders. Each week, we sit down with sales coaches, successful sales leaders, and others at the top of their game to share what they've learned and help you to coach the sale.
Hi, and welcome to episode number 17 of Coach the Sale. I'm your host, as always, Matt Heyman, Marketing Manager at Refract.ai. And in today's episode, we're talking all things SDR with the one and only Morgan J Ingram, host on YouTube of the SDR Chronicles, which is a fantastic series that I recommend anybody working in sales should check out. Now, whether or not you are an SDR, you coach SDRs, or you manage a team of SDRs, this episode, I think, is going to be of huge value. I was lucky enough to sit down with Morgan at the recent SaaS Growth Sales Confidence event earlier in July in London, and we cover a range of topics, including his story to date, going from a new SDR to 2 years later having a really popular YouTube channel documenting his path to sales success. In this episode, we also cover what are the common mistakes and pitfalls of being an SDR, the case for split testing your messaging as an SDR, how to start to structure and implement multi-touch cadences with your prospects, the ongoing relevance of cold calling, building up resilience, holding on to a successful mindset in sales, and best practices for making an impact on your audience. Huge thanks to Morgan for sitting down with me at the event. I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you do too. Let's get straight to it with Morgan J Ingram. Morgan, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
How are you doing?
Happy to be here. I'm doing good.
So, we're at this sales confidence event.
Yep.
What brings you to the event?
Yeah, so just over here, checking out the sales whole entire unit over here when it comes to Europe. So I think that's pretty cool. And then I was over here for a public workshop. So yeah, just here for a week and enjoying it.
So some people listening may not be aware of you. They may not be aware of the SDR Chronicles, the thing that I think a lot of people are aware of when it comes to you. Give us a little bit of background, who you are, how have you come to be where you are today, and a little bit of background on the SDR Chronicles as well.
Yeah, so loaded question there, right?
Very loaded.
I would say, not to bring it too far back, the background for me is I started off as an SDR. So for those of you who don't know what an SDR is, like sales development rep. And so in that, prospecting net new accounts and making cold calls, emails, and everything across the board. Now, to make sure that I was doing that job right, there's obviously a lot of best practices that I learned along the way, which we'll touch on here in this podcast. But essentially, I started off cold called, got the job, and in the first 3 months, I really did struggle. I tell people this all the time, like I almost wanted to quit. I did not want to do what I was doing, and I actually talked to my director of sales at the time, and she was like, hey, are you really feeling up to this? Do you want to do this? And then I was like, I don't know. Like, I feel like this isn't the job for me. And then she asked me a question that was super important, which was, hey, are you 100% committed to what you're doing right now? And then I was like, not really, right? I was like 75. And so from there, like what I did is I organized my schedule. I got more proficient in my process. I understood how do I make those cold calls? How do I do those emails? And that led to their success.
So what I hear you say there is one of the reasons why it was 75% was a lack of structure, process.
Lack of structure, complaining about things that were not essentially in my control that I shouldn't have been complaining about. And I think 3, like my focus was 100% focused on actually doing well in that.
Yeah.
I think it was just like, I treated it as like, oh, this is a job, whatever, but I didn't treat it as like, I can learn a lot from it and see what I can do in the future.
And that led you to set up the SDR Chronicles?
Yep, so it was from that. I had a couple people advice. One person said, hey, look, an SDR has not created an SDR-specific channel. So then that's when I, that day, went to go create the SDR Chronicles. And then from creating SDR Chronicles, posted every single day for like 5 to 6 months, that led into the evolution of me getting promoted to SDR manager with 13 reps, which moved me into the role I am today, which is training, sales development, prospecting to other reps.
And if you cast your mind back, like what were the main reasons for setting up that channel? Because there's a lot of work involved, prep work, recording, editing, all the things that go into podcasts like this. Like, what were you looking to achieve? What was the main purpose of that?
Right. Well, so just from an outside perspective, what do you feel like I was looking to achieve?
I think what I've certainly learned doing the podcast is just having conversations with people like you is a great way for me to learn. So it was a great way through osmosis to kind of listen to what's working for people. And although I don't have a sales role at Refract, it helps me hugely because we sell to salespeople.
Right.
So to get into the mindset of modern day salespeople, I learned a lot through just talking with experts. Absolutely. It was a great way for me to learn.
Yeah. So that was part of it. One was I wanted to share my learnings and share obstacles. And I felt like there wasn't any content on that when I first started. Before I even started my SDR role, I was looking up sales development content, but I realized that all the content that was being developed, nobody was actually in that role. So it was very, my theory, here's my hypothesis, and I wanted something that was very tactical. So I just, instead of waiting for it, I just went out and created it myself. Like there's no barrier entry to do it. So yeah, I'm gonna do it myself.
So one of the things that was a motivator for me with the podcast is also about leveling up the professionalism of the sales industry, of sales professionals, treating it as a profession. Was that ever part of your thinking in terms of there is a perception of sales? I'd like to do a little bit to try and enhance that.
So funny enough, I actually wanted to go to marketing. Right? So I didn't ever want to be in sales, and then that didn't work out, so I went to be an SDR. And so when I was doing the role, I was like, well, we have a terrible connotation. And I would always tell people, hey, I'm in sales, and then people would like treat me differently. I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I was like, I want to create these videos to show that you don't have to be an a-hole to be in sales. Like there's a certain process you can take and still see success.
Yeah. One of the things that stands out for me that was a trigger point for me actually doing the podcast was being at a wedding and speaking to a couple of people, guests at the wedding who were all in sales, 2 or 3. And you'd ask them, as you do at these events, you sort of say, oh, so what do you do? And they'd say, oh, sales. And you could hear in their voice a sort of a lack of pride, a sense that if I tell you I work in sales, you're going to make lots of assumptions about me and who I am and what I do, and that I'm going to manipulate the conversation.
Right.
You could hear it. And I was thinking, what can we do to try and change that so that people can be proud of what they do?
Absolutely.
Similar for you?
I would think it's tough because there's always going to be people who are louder and cause that mayhem, right? The people who are the loudest end up being the people who are those salespeople, and they in return are going to be the people that actually receive that message.
Yeah.
So I think the one thing that a lot of people should be focused on is what is the best way you can guide in that sales process. So that's what are the questions you should be asking, what is the right intro you should be having, how do you make sure that you're professional follow-up. And I think it comes down to the way to get it better is to like treat it as a process and you're guiding someone instead of like, hey, we're in a sales cycle, I'm just going to hammer home on you.
Okay,
right.
So that's a great way to move into some of the learnings that you got out of those initial interviews and have continued to last since then. Give me a sense of some of the common mistakes that you often see SDRs follow. You've alluded to 1 or 2, and maybe not having a structure, but what are some of the pitfalls that an SDR will typically fall into?
Not A/B testing. So not testing out new stuff and staying with the status quo.
Yeah, explain that for people, like for a marketer like me, A/B testing is my life.
Yeah.
Explain what that means for somebody who may not be familiar with
So what that means is like trying out different approaches. Okay. So that's, hey, you try one way on a phone call, you try another way how to do it on a phone call, you try another way how to do it on a phone call. So there's just different aspects and there's different lengths that you can do if you're making that phone call. I think that's what a lot of reps, and that's a mistake they make, is they only focus on this one thing they want to do, and they'll hammer that home instead of trying out multiple stuff. I think also at the same time too is being creative. I don't think SDRs are creative enough in their process. I think they just stick to the status quo, the motions that they normally are used to. Goes back again, the A/B testing piece. And I think 3 is not doing a multi-touch campaign. I think people are like, well, I'm really good at the phone, so I'm only going to use the phone. Right? Oh, I'm really good at emailing, so I'm only going to email.
Or maybe I'm not very good on the phone, so I'll rely on email as a crutch.
Which you need to stay, all those, you got to stay away from.
Yeah. So out of those initial interviews, are there any that stand out in particular as ones that are particularly poignant, or lessons that helped you very early on in the process?
Interviews that like I've done myself, or interviews I do
I
with
would
other
say
people, or I've
particularly-
watched as content. Like
I would say ones that you've done yourself, ones that stand out to you as content of those interviews in particular helped you speed up your journey to where you are today.
it's a good question. I'd say Phil Keen was one of the very first ones. We're actually still good friends to this day. And the reason that one was very impactful is because he went from being an SDR, then he was like an SDR leader, then he, was an AE, right? So he was guiding multiple steps. So that was inspiring to me to see like what are the actual steps that need to be taken. And I think another one that was really great was Dan Cook from Lucid. Started off as an SDR and now he's an SVP of sales. So it's cool. It was just cool to hear that progression.
Other people like you who've gone through a
Yeah,
journey.
and then just see where he went. I think that was awesome.
Excellent. So I want to return back to some tips. You deliver training, right, at the moment. You carry a sales quota.
Yeah.
And you also are delivering the training.
Yeah. There's a lot going on.
How do you juggle that?
How do I juggle it?
How do you-
It's chaos. It's mayhem. Some days I have no idea how I do it. But it comes down to just managing time and leveraging the right resources, right? So everyone has a team to some extent. So there's just certain people on my team that do certain things, right? There's certain people in our company that do certain things that help make it easier, right? We have someone who handles the contracts. We have someone who handles the content, right? We have someone who handles certain research. And at the same time, I know where my lane is to be proficient. And then I also know when I can sell more, or I need to take off on calls, or today is not the day I need to make an adjustment somewhere. But I know how to make those adjustments.
Okay. And how important is coaching in the work that you do, both in terms of managing your own quota, but also in the training that you deliver? Talk to me, this is Coach the Sale, this is about coaching. Where does coaching feature for you? How important is it? And how important maybe has it been?
Yeah, so there's two things that go with that. One is there's a difference between training and coaching.
Yeah.
Right, so I go train someone, I'm there for a day, maybe it's two, right? And then I'm gone. I can't actively coach that. So coaching is imperative because you have to make sure that whatever is trained on or the techniques that were implemented is repeatable. If it's not as a part of the repeatable process, no one's gonna get any success, right? So that's important. And I think number two is John coaches me on calls, and that's been helpful for me to understand what I'm doing wrong and how I can get better. So coaching's a continuous loop that always has to happen, no matter if you're the best or the worst.
How long have you been delivering training?
It's been a year.
Okay. In that time, you must have seen, what would you estimate the number of people you've trained in that period? Just ballpark.
Easily over 1,000 at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there any people or experiences that you've had along the way that you found particularly inspiring in the training that you've delivered in particular? Any stories that you want to share of people who've had breakthroughs?
Breakthroughs like from like the training, breakthroughs just from like the content.
In their
and
sales,
just, like,
in their
success.
sales. Your goal as a trainer is to help people improve.
Yeah.
Have you had any people come through where they've really stood out to you as taking on board what you've said and it making a big difference?
Yeah, there was one rep. He took the cold calling super seriously, and he went and then he just started scheduling like 10 opportunities a week. I think I was like, that's nuts. But he was just like, he was getting people on the phone, which so many people are like, how in the world do you get people on the phone? He just did. I don't know. He was good at it. And then it's just the way that he got confident, handle objections. Like you could see that he was like doing really well. And there's also another person that took my training, and they just implemented the structure I have, which is we call the attention grabbers. And he used that formula, and it helped him get promoted to an AE. So, it's just like little stuff like that. There's a lot of different other stories, but those two like really stood out to me.
Okay, so that's a nice pivot. That's a nice segue into the attention grabbers process.
Yeah.
We'll take a little bit of time if it's okay with you. Can you talk me through that process, some of the principles, the guiding principles of that process that people listening to this could start to use quite quickly if they're in SDR or managing SDRs?
Yeah, so in that process, like the big thing that you want to focus on is what result are you giving to that person, right? So that's the attention grabber piece. And you got to map that out to maybe it's an industry, maybe it's a certain persona, it doesn't really matter. And in that, once you've identified what that industry or persona is, then you want to be able to figure out what result can I bring them. So in that, the attention grabber piece is what I created, a scalable model that's all based on a spreadsheet that I plug and play into a email or a phone call. So if I call X persona and I know I give them this result, then that's my phone call. Same thing for email, same thing for maybe a video or a voice message.
And just in that, let me jump in.
Yeah.
Are you calling back to how you have helped other people in that situation, as opposed to sort of a promise? You actually, in that, you're calling back to, I have helped people like you in that situation.
The latter.
Right.
If I've helped them, right? I'm not gonna be like, hey, I've helped people in that situation. I didn't. Like,
yeah.
Don't do that. But I do it where it's like, yeah, I actually did help someone in that situation. Same title as you, similar industry. Let's do it.
Okay. So that's the first stage. Talk me through the rest.
So once you have that, then you create the attention grabber.
Yeah.
And the next stage is creating that laboratory of attention grabbers. And then that next step after that is, hey, let's put these into phone calls. Let's put these into emails. And then from there, earlier what we talked about, which was A/B testing.
So are you encouraging SDRs to track number of times they've sent a particular email? How granular are you in that tracking?
What is my suggestion, or like me?
Yeah.
Me,
what would you
like
suggest?
me?
Both, I guess. Yeah.
The suggestion, it's hard for me to say because people are targeting enterprise, mid-market, SMB accounts.
Okay.
So their volume level is going to be different, right? So if someone's going SMB, they're doing extremely high call volume. If they're doing enterprise, their call volume is going to be lower. So whatever I tell you at A/B test is going to be different based on those numbers.
But ultimately, whatever the person's situation, they're looking for a level of significance. They're looking for something that suggests this version A is moving away from version B quite
that's
quickly.
the framework regardless.
Yeah.
But for me, I do 50 to 100. So that means 50 tests. If I get a good response rate on 50 emails, then I'll move it to, I'll send out 50 more, so 100. And if those work, then I'll move it into like a pool of, this is what I now use.
Any tips you want to share on particular attention grabbers that worked for you, maybe in an email? I know it's going to vary from industry to industry, but have you got anything that sort of stands out as working very well?
Yeah, I mean, I have one that works very well, but yeah, what I'm about to say is not going to be applicable to a lot of people. So, they're going to be like, what? So, but yeah.
Food for thought, though.
Yeah. So essentially how I would stage it is, hey, we work with VP of Sales Enablement like yourself, whose main priority is onboarding. And those enablement leaders use our online platform to make sure they can onboard those reps effectively and produce results immediately out of boot camp. That would be an attention grabber that I would use on the phone or through email.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where do we go from there then, after the attention grabber?
Well, after that, then you ask a question, right? So whatever thoughtful question that leads into a conversation. So you got to figure out what that is. And essentially what that would be is an open-ended question. Right. So the question on top of that, once I said that attention grabber, would be, how are you currently making sure your reps are being onboarded effectively? Okay. Right. Or how are you currently making sure that your reps are getting modern sales best practices to streamline a process for success? Those are things you'd be looking at.
Okay. And where do we go from there? Once you've started to collect that, you've got the data, things are starting to work. Where else would we go in terms of the process that you've outlined?
You're getting results. I don't know. I don't know where else you can go from there, right?
Keep doing more of it.
I mean, you got an attention grabber, you got the questions. I mean, you just continuously create repeatable processes for your industries and your personas. You can get super deep, go add testimonials to those attention grabbers. But once you've established those two, it pretty much just goes into putting them in emails and calls.
Yep.
And then actually doing it. That's the next step, is executing on it.
Yeah. So in terms of the multi-touch approach, you advocate people going on phone, email, it being a mixture.
Yeah.
One of the things that is sometimes talked about, we talked about it on the podcast, is the use of a pattern interrupt. Something that stands out, it grabs attention.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're alluding to here, is using something that sort of breaks a pattern that people are used to.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And any particular tips on how to start to formulate one of those?
The pattern interrupts?
Yeah.
Depends on the situation. Okay. So in what way would you be thinking about that?
So is there a universal way of setting up a pattern interrupt? Is it ultimately, its definition is it's taking somebody from what they're expecting and presenting them with something that is counter to that, which forces them to reevaluate what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Are there steps that people can take when they're trying to think about how they could do that?
I think it ultimately comes down to, in your process, this is more so cold calls. Pattern interrupts happen through emails, but you can't see them as visibly. You have to figure out, when do people say yes or no to you, or when do people not receive the value you're saying, right? So a pattern interrupt essentially be a question or something you say, again, that throws someone off, if you guys don't know what a pattern interrupt is.
Yeah.
So a pattern interrupt that I use is an intro for my cold calls. So let's say that I'm calling Bob, right? So I'm like, hi, Bob. Thanks for taking my call. Do you have a few moments? And so in me saying that, I didn't introduce my name. So that's a pattern up because people are used to hearing people's name when they hear the sales call. So now I've introduced myself without a name. So now you're like, wait, who are you, right? Then now I can be like, hey, my name is Morgan Ingram from JBL Sales Training. The reason for my call is I've interrupted the pattern. You want to figure out who I am. Now I'm going straight into it, and now you give me the right to do that. So that'd be an example of a pattern interrupt. And you can do the same thing with objections, same thing with questions. But where you want to start is where are you faltering? If you're faltering in the intro, find out a pattern interruption intro, right? If you're faltering on this objection, what's the pattern interrupt answer or question you can ask to get yourself in that direction?
Fantastic. I love that. That's really, really good. And that works well for you.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
consistent.
Yeah.
Brilliant. You mentioned cold calls there. A lot of talk about cold calling no longer being relevant in sales. It's not, especially as a marketer, I think there's historically been a real overemphasis on the power of marketing automation, correcting, or making it easy. It's going to take all of that away. And I certainly personally don't believe that at all. How valuable do you think the cold call is? Does it still have a place in modern sales?
Yeah, absolutely. So the cold call still has a place in modern sales. The cold call is still applicable and it's still powerful. The thing is, you're just not going to call 2 people and get an answer. This is not going to happen. You're going to call 30 to 50 people. Those 30 to 50 people, probably 1 or 2 of them are going to answer, and then you got to figure out how do you navigate a conversation with one of those 2 people.
Yeah.
So you're not going to make 30 calls and get 20 answers, but you will get an answer. It's just being very strategic in the way that you do it. So hey, for an hour, I'm going to make calls to this person, this persona, right?
Yeah.
For 30 minutes, I'm going to do this calling. So that makes it more effective as a whole.
And how would you, or what advice would you give to people who the fear of being rejected or the fear of interrupting? Like, how would you start to work with somebody who has kind of is reluctant to do it because A, maybe they don't want to interrupt, or B, they're very fearful of having somebody tell them to disappear? I
mean, so number one, you shouldn't be worried about that because the person's going to forget you after 5 seconds. So it's really not that deep when you really think about it. Like, if I call someone to get rejected, worst case scenario is that they reject me. It's literally the worst case scenario. Now, it'd be different if you made a cold call and every time you got rejected, you got pinched or something, but that doesn't happen. You just get rejected, the person hangs up, they forget you after 5 seconds, they move on. So if you have that mindset, it's a lot easier to make cold calls.
And my guess would be that's a resilience that you build up over time.
Yeah,
it's not, you can't just flick a switch, but the more you're exposed to it, the more you become accustomed to it.
Right, and then if you keep that mindset that I just told you in mind, that wholeness of caring about that goes down dramatically. And then that next piece that you mentioned, which was diving into the different components of fear of rejection.
Okay, so next question from me then. In terms of your learning, can you think of a time recently when you have learned something that has had a particular impact on you? And I'd be very keen for you to share that with our audience.
I've been practicing public speaking for 5 to 6 years. So if I do a podcast interview, if I go present to somebody, I can do it pretty well without a lot of angst on me. And it's just a natural thing that I can do now. But the thing is I sometimes don't dive as much into the research of actually understanding the audience. Right, so I give you best practices and good advice, and you can use it yourself, but I don't conceptualize what's actually happening with the audience. Especially since I'm in Europe, so this is a great example. So when I come train in Europe, that training is completely different than what it is in the United States. But I have to stage it differently. Otherwise, it won't be received as well.
Okay.
So one thing that I've been learning as of late is before I go do something where maybe I don't have as good enough context, or maybe I need to go figure out what I need to learn, I'll actually just go reach out to someone in that company, in that country, or whatever, and get quick feedback. And so what I've learned from an insight that I actually learned from my mentor is he calls it think, feel, do. So think, be okay, what do I need to think about before I go into this presentation? Feel, how does the audience feel and how do I make them feel comfortable? And then do, how do I execute off what I'm feeling off of them? So that's one thing I've been learning lately, and that's made my workshops, conversations way more impactful.
And as part of that as well, thinking how you want the audience to feel at the end of the material as well, and connecting with what you want them to feel at the end. Good.
Exactly. So then it's all tied into that, makes it more powerful, all that stuff.
Yeah. And you get a stronger sense of whether or not you've made the impact.
The actual impact.
You've got some degree of a way of calibrating the audience and the progression that they may have made.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, last question then. Books. Now we're at the Sales Confidence event, SaaS Growth 2019. We've a whole table of books there that we've been giving out today. Some people very eager to get their free copies, which is great. Any books that have made a difference to you, or ones that you've read recently that you've enjoyed, ones that you would share with the audience?
It's a book called Captivate. It's by Vanessa Van Edwards. It's really good. And it's focused on human psychology and how do you actually relate to humans as well. And when you really think about it, sales is all about psychology. So the more you understand about psychology, the better you will be at sales. And so that book fundamentally has helped me with human behavior and psychology, which in return has led to more and better conversations.
So I'm a subscriber to one of these services that will summarize a book in 15 minutes, and you often miss a lot of the detail in there.
You do.
I want you to go one better. Could you summarize it in 10 seconds, or at least one of the takeaways from that book that's made a definite impact on you?
I mean, it's in relation, like in the highest level, it's understanding human psychology and understanding human interaction and how to effectively navigate that to get the end result that you're looking for.
Brilliant. Love it.
Yeah.
We've got a new product on our hands. It's the 5-second reduction of a 13-hour audio book into 5 seconds. Morgan, really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thank you so much. How can people find out more about you and the work that you do? Yeah,
so super simple. Go to Morgan J Ingram. That's me on LinkedIn. So we can connect there, and then jrails.com. That's where we're at.
Awesome. And we'll also link to the SDR Chronicles videos, which still on YouTube?
Still on YouTube.
Fantastic. Great resource, and we'll share those with the audience. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cheers, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Coach the Sale. For show notes, sales coaching resources, and more, visit refract.ai/coach.